Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Career in Music and Technology lecture series. Before we get started this afternoon, I wanted to tell you about a couple of other CSM events happening quite soon. One is this Friday. We have our jazz festival where jazz ensembles from all the area high schools come. And at noontime, there's a CSM jazz ensemble concert with a guest artist, and that's at noon, and it's open and free to the public, and I wanted to make sure everybody knows about that event coming up. And then secondly, we have our CSM electronic music concert coming up on Thursday, December 7th, 7 p.m. in the theater, which is right next door. Also free and open to the public. I hope everyone can make that. I know a lot of you sitting in the audience will be involved with that, and we're really looking forward to hearing all of your pieces. So today I'd like to introduce Joel Davel. Joel is a composer, percussionist, electronic musician, as well as an electronic music instrument designer. As a percussionist and composer, he's worked with many different musical groups throughout the Bay Area and different collaborators. He's worked with dance quite a bit, composing original and performing original music for that. He's also had a long-standing relationship with collaborator Paul Drescher and the Paul Drescher Ensemble. He has a new project coming up with Paul Drescher that he'll talk about a little bit later on. As an instrument builder and designer, he worked for over 20 years with Don Buchla. Many of you may know Don Buchla, an instrument designer, brilliant instrument inventor, local to the Bay Area, and worked on early instruments in the 60s and 70s, all through his life, including some of the instruments that we're going to get to actually hear a little bit today. So please help me welcome Joel Davel.
Thanks a lot. I'm going to talk mostly career. There's going to be some instrument demo, but that instrument demo portion may be a whole other lecture. So we won't get in too deep on each instrument, but I will sort of give you some ideas of what things I've been working on. You'll certainly get a good idea of my bio. Probably you'll learn some things. And maybe it'll be a good perspective on depending on where you are in your career, give you some ideas about possibilities. I don't know. But here we go. So I really, just to sort of give my bio, I start as a drummer, right? So when I'm 9, let's see if this does what I want it to do. No, I started as a drummer. So, well, let me talk about this first slide, actually. There's an ideal fantasy career, and that is to sort of have this support staff and a lucrative salary. At least this is my fantasy ideal. And then you have it performing and recording your own music whenever you are inspired. And that's pretty impossible. There's usually things that can prevent all of that from happening. But the next best is perform your music whenever you have the chance. And so that's what I'm doing now. And so I'm going to just play a little bit. I start as a drummer. But there are way too many drummers in the world, at least in the classes that I was in. So who's going to play the Glock? marimba. So, thanks. So that gives you some idea of what this instrument is, but let me move on and talk about what actual careers in music and technology, to me, my first list I came up with when I was thinking about this. And for me, there's like, okay, maybe you get famous making your own music and you keep recording and touring and do what you do whenever you want. That's sort of the ideal, but that's very rare. You know, for those people, you could probably count on your hand how many people those are, or you know them because they're famous. But the second best thing on that list, or at least something that's related, is you can actually do production for that famous act. So I actually know a lot of people who do that. They do tech support for, I know a guy who does tech support from Tool. He calls me a fair amount. That's partly because Tool, that band, owns a Marimba Lumina, not one like this, a gold one. And also there's a guy from Fish who occasionally I hear from, and they do some tech because they own one of these. So those guys are doing support for that band. They're not in the band, they're behind the scenes. You go backstage, I've been backstage of a Fish concert, and you wander around and there's one guy mixing audio for the video recording. There's another guy, of course, mixing monitors, another guy in the house. There's a lot of support staff, besides the fact that there's also people getting fed and whatnot, but that's not your job. Your job is to probably be part of the music and technology part of the equation. And that could be very satisfying. And the next job I think of is maybe you get a job as a performer in a regular touring or recording band. So now you're in the band. And that's excellent, if you can keep that going. Now, more realistic, you're in a band that's doing that, but you're still teaching a bit on the side because that band's not on the road all the time. That's a pretty good career, and that could be either simply as an instrumentalist or somebody who's really involved in the technology side of it as well. And the third one is you compose and perform, but you teach at an institution for your main source of income. That's not a bad gig, because if you can get a teaching gig and it pays well enough, you can kind of do what music you want. You can compose the music you want, and you don't have to be, maybe there are requirements in your institution. But that includes universities, that also includes just privately. So that's the third one. Fourth one, you compose for commissions and you maybe arts administrate on the side. So I know people who do that. Paul Drescher is someone who does that. He has to write for commissions. And when he's not doing commission work, he's performing with me or doing other things, but he's doing a lot of arts administration. It's just one of those things you have to do if you want to keep a career that's like what we do. And then number 5, you get a job in something unrelated but really remunerative. I kind of like that word because it sort of suggests it's both rewarding and lucrative. But you therefore can afford to play and record whatever you want on the side. I know people who do this too, who have good jobs. Some of them are in music technology companies, but it's full-time. But on the side, they play crazy improv music that they don't get paid barely anything to do. But they're very musically satisfied. And that's, I kind of envy that idea, that you can kind of do that. You just have a good gig, and if you're not totally worn out at the end of the day, you can do that. I consider that kind of a career, especially if your day job includes kind of doing some of that work as well, but even if it doesn't, if it just satisfies you and you can get out and do music, that's great. The 5th one is, oh no, that was the 5th one. The 6th one, you get a job with a music company and you play whenever you can. That means that could be with Sequential or one of these synthesizer companies, or maybe you're doing sales and tech support on the phone. People need that. So that's number A. But the other is you're a creator. If you get into playing and you know about, say you know about instrument building like I've learned, is you are the creator. That's actually can be a good gig, can be very satisfying. You don't always end up with a lot of extra time on the side to do your thing though, because you might burn out on the music side of things and not actually play interesting music outside of your job. You might end up, doing all these demos, trade shows, and that could be satisfying, but are you doing your music? I don't know. Hopefully you can. Number 7, you contract for all of the above and you try to stay sane. That's kind of what I do. Sometimes I'll tour with a band for a couple weeks. Sometimes I've done it for a month. But then I come back and I have a regular gig that building instruments, electronic music instruments like this. It's a bit of everything. Sometimes I'll teach too. I'll teach on the side. If you can consider this teaching, I guess I'm teaching now. But I've also taken gigs, and you'll see, where I've had to teach just to fill in the gaps when the work wasn't there. And I contract for all of this work. So it kind of allows me to do whatever I want when I want. That gives me a lot of freedom. And so and I do support for the company too. I do some tech support, and sometimes it feels like a real job where I'm doing just circuit board layout, and it's not for something quite musically related, but it's something I'm doing on the side, and that can be somewhat rewarding. And then I will compose for commissions as well. I've done a lot of dance work, and then let's see, going back up to the top, I've explained some of that, and then I'll tour, and I try to keep it all going, but it's really hard. I mean, my motivation, as it says, is choosing to feel what is meaningful for me at the moment, and just also getting an opportunity to play with these various groups, because it can be really diverse. But the challenge is both self-motivation. That means I have to get up and really I wake up in the morning not knowing what I might do that day. I don't necessarily have to go into the Buchla company and do my work. That's often something on my list. But I have to be ready for rehearsal maybe the next day, and I need to spend maybe the entire day doing that, just rehearsing myself. So there's a lot of discipline involved, and I have to be available at the right time because I'll have conflicts, right? So the nice thing about having the Buchla company is I get to choose projects that I like to work on. I don't have to always be working on a project because the more projects I work on, the more conflicts there are. But inevitably, they still come up, and major groups, things that I want to work on, have conflicts. So it just happens. My own career starts with a classical training in percussion, and it ends up intertwined with Don Buchla. That's this big summary of my bio. Is kind of that. And here's a picture of me actually playing with the Fremont Symphony. I still like to play with orchestras when I can, but I also like to play drum set. So this is kind of a fun one because I got to play drum set. I don't know if you can see me up there. And it's sort of a pops concert for the Fremont Symphony. And but then I also worked with Don Buchla, who you see a picture of there when I was much younger. Although I'm not that much younger, I have a goatee. So there's Don. This is circa around 1980, 1979. I know a lot of these older pictures are black and white. I don't know why, because we had color film at the time. But at the time, I think black and white pictures just look better. So here's Don with a lot of his instruments. You see some of the, not anything that I brought here so much, but there's 200 series, there's 400. There's a cello, you might see him. So he's a creator of innovative and unusual instruments. So why did he do that, and what can we learn from it? I guess the next point is I'm going to give you a little bit of Buchla history now, because that sort of figures it. So Don Buchla, if you don't know, he was kind of a high-level engineer. He was doing stuff. He did work at Cal. He did some interesting things with NASA, and he studied astronomy. He studied a little bit of music. He studied physiology and sensors on chimps that were going to be put in space, or dogs, actually, I think it was mostly. And he was working a lot with sensors and doing some interesting work, but I think in some ways he was trying to figure out what to do that was somewhat satisfying. And he came upon, well, I'll get to what he came upon in a second. So he was doing some interesting work with, this is something for the blind called the orb. That's not directly related to music, but it's kind of interesting that he was working with LiDAR, early kind of LiDAR concepts back in '64. And this is a contract that he had to build something for the blind. And if you look, actually, you kind of see these interesting wave shapes that look like electronic music. But that's not what they were for in this particular device. Then you get to the 100 series. This is something that Mort Sabatnik, who's in town, by the way, has a show tomorrow, Thursday night, up in San Francisco. He was looking for someone to build some things to control tape decks. I think mostly he was thinking tape decks at the time. But basically, some new technology at CSM, at the Center for Contemporary Music at Mills College, which is where I and Chris both went. And he proposed to Don. Don said he showed up there on accident. He was looking for something else. I think Don was just hanging around the new music scene. And Mort proposed this idea. Don said, I could do that. And he actually started working on it. It actually didn't come to fruition until about 65, 66. But in the meantime, he was working on that blind contract, right? So, quick history here. It's almost ready 12:30, so I'm going to kind of give you a whirlwind of Don Buchla's history. We end up with the 100 series, which is a modular system. This is the device that Mort used, I believe, to control the 10 tape decks. That's, I think, was the idea. And notice there are 10, I believe there are 10 pulse outputs and control voltages. This is not a standard keyboard. And this is not a standard keyboard. It's a touch-sensitive keyboard. And then you end up with more stuff. So I'm blowing through all this 100 series stuff. You end up now going to, this is something at Columbia. You end up with the electric music box. It's basically the 200 series, and Don starts to get a little more colorful. It's the 70s. Don's no longer going with, you can see back there, everything is sort of black and white and very symmetrical. And actually, Don realizes it's not such a great thing, both because it's hard to know what does what because everything's so symmetrical, and it's not very colorful. There's no colors telling you what is what either. So when you get to the 200 series in the 70s, Don's actually got colorful cables that tell you what length everything is, and he's got a lot of color, not just in the cases, but in the in all the knobs and all the bananas. The bananas now mean something different. As the 70s go on, the banana colors evolve too, so that each banana color means something specific, whether it's pulse in, pulse out, CV in, CV out. He had some of that going in the 60s, but not as much. And then you end up with touch-activated keyboards like this one, not unlike the first one. It's capacitive sensed. So what it is your body is like the dielectric. Your skin is sort of the dielectric. Your body has a ground, and when you touch the surface, you engage the key, and now you can use pressure sensitivity as well as the finger detection. So you're not moving. There's nothing mechanical in any of these keyboards. and you end up with the music easel. So the music easel, I swear I'm hearing my loop in the background somewhere, but that's okay. The music easel, which is a version I have here, is a touch-activated keyboard. And it's sort of a complete instrument. A lot of the things Don had been doing were modular. You would figure out, what's nice about that is you can determine how you're going to put your system together. In some ways, a module is like a composition. The 266 had all these different ways of doing random. You create interesting possibilities by just thinking about, well, how can I solve this compositional problem by creating a module? Well, to get more to a complete instrument, Don created the easel, which is Brenda's here, isn't he? Brenda was very briefly part of the Electric Weasel Ensemble, which could use, actually had groups of people playing on music easels. And there were these things called program cards where they could kind of create a set and sort of a potential for a piece based on their pre-setup, their setup with resistors. You see actually a picture here of a program card here. You can program, it's current controlled, everything is current controlled. So just one resistor will actually set either the switch position or the fader position. So this is an early way of making presets before digital control. Now, what I've done here is I've actually created a digital control of current so I'm actually still using the same technology. This easel here, still uses a lot of the same circuits that Don used in the 70s, but the and the card is the same as well. But now I can change the presets a little quicker. What touch-activated keyboard allows you to do and gets you thinking is not so much of necessarily a keyboard. It's just an input device. So one of the things Don was into, and certainly Mort was into, getting away from the 12 notes in an octave keyboard. But it's not a bad arrangement of notes, not even if you don't think of them as pitches, because you can kind of remember what a keyboard looks like and where you are. But you don't have to activate it. Actually, like a keyboard. So if you're thinking electronic music, you're thinking timbres, you're not necessarily thinking about pitches. But doesn't mean you can't. So as more of my finger presses on the key, I'm changing the speed of these clicks, right? So it's another way of thinking about music. Or it can be just a basic keyboard. So anyway, so it can be a standard keyboard. It's kind of nice as a percussionist, actually. I can flip it into kind of a mode. Right? So in that way, it's just a standard keyboard, but it's, I can, you can play it with anything that's conductive, but my glasses will not play it. That won't play it, right? Nothing happens. You need something. So that's the easel. I think I'm going to skip over that a little bit, and I'm going to jump to whatever the next slide is. So we have the easel. We have also keyboards. Don is not anti-keyboard. He just loves the idea that your idea of music is expanded by not using a traditional one. However, that doesn't mean he didn't use it. In fact, he started working with keyboards and particularly digital interaction. So he was an early adopter of trying to use digital control for analog circuits. And right around this time, I'm kind of doing the same thing. What is happening is I'm taking music lessons. I'm a kid. I'm taking public school lessons and taking a little bit of trumpet. And my first performances are at churches. Well, at a particular church. And that church actually had a Moog. The organist had a Moog as his like extra register. He was like playing Bach fugues, and he would just reach his hand up and start playing that. And occasionally he would say, hey, you're in the choir. Hey, I'm going to put this over here. Instead of playing the timpani part, I want you to play this little bass line on the Moog. So I thought it was a completely normal thing to have one of these at an institution like a church. Turns out it wasn't, but that's okay. And what's nice about church gigs is actually they both pay well. There's a great community of very nice people, and I still do them. I still do them at Christmas and Easter and that sort of seasonal time. And actually, it's kind of a lot of fun because there's a community of musicians. A lot of them are Jewish who are playing the churches I play at, but they're still playing the Christmas and Easter gigs, and we get to improvise a fair amount. We're sort of arranging on the spot, like jazz musicians. A lot of them are jazz musicians, and they do church gigs on the side. At least that's the ones that I play. There are also classical people who do, but they have to read. What's great about the gig I have is I show up and he goes, maybe you play timpani on this one. And I play it on the Marimba Lumina. So I have all of this possibility. Oh, okay, I'll play timpani, sure. Oh, can you play a keyboard thing? Okay, fine. Oh, can you move over to the drum set and play congas? Yeah, okay, I'll play congas. So actually, I kind of still enjoy these church gigs. And then when I was a kid, not only I had a little bit of church gigs, but I was learning some interesting things about sound because I had a father who worked for Koss headphones, Koss stereo phones. And we had tape decks, and we each have our own set of headphones. And that we didn't live with the guy. He brought us all these albums from trade shows and things that he didn't need anymore. They all said stereo. And so we got some weird synth albums. I was listening to Isaac Hayes and Stevie Wonder as a kid and going, I don't know what this music is, but it's not anything that my friends were listening to. And The Planets, I thought, was an amazing album. We had like 3 copies of the same album. I don't know why, but we did. And we had a couple of different versions of The Planets, I guess. And so I was being turned on to some really interesting music. Switched on Bach was an album we had, and that was an early Moog album that kind of put together some interesting ideas about, I don't know, very tuned analog synthesizers. It's a little bit cheesy in some ways, but it was also kind of ear-opening for a kid. And then on the posters, my posters on my wall were these. I had the Mona Lisa on my wall, so but it was a poster for Koss headphones. This was something and also a Rodin apparently, and also some really bad puns and whatnot. But that was sort of that was the environment I was coming from. one of the worst things about that is he lost that gig and he had to take this other job, or he tried to create jobs in sales, and he would give us piecework to do, including like putting these stickers on Koss headphone things that would stick into the connectors, because the whole idea is you don't want to get dust in your connectors. So we were doing a lot of weird jobs, and to the point where he actually started this bindery. He couldn't own it because long business. He made some bad business decisions, and he ended up owing the IRS a ton of money. But it doesn't matter. He was still able to get us a job, and it was working at a bindery. And the reason I had to work at a bindery is because the public school near me wasn't that great for high school. So if I really wanted to go to the school, I had to pay for it. That was better. And the bindery work actually did that. And it paid enough during the vacations and summers where I could do that. I mean, some of you may have come from circumstances where it's not ideal. You know, hey, nobody paid me to go to this, or I didn't go to this private school. But, you know, you've had to work for it, right? I totally understand that. And this job actually gave me a lot of perspective, because my hands were just, after doing these, working on a folding machine, which is the picture on the right, that thing was so loud. You think of a machine making 8 folds of paper, it's like a ton of them. It was nauseatingly loud, and you would put rubber bands around it, and the cuticles on your fingers it was horrible. You get paper cuts all the time. You're walking tables doing collating. The perspective was I didn't want to have to do that hand labor for the rest of my life. So there were people who were a lot older than me doing it, and I totally respect them for doing that, but they didn't have a lot of skills. The thing was, you really need to acquire skills if you don't want to do these kinds of things. I mean, the skill in there, or mailing was another thing we had to do, just sort mail. So one of the things I did to start to gain some skills was I actually auditioned for and got into a youth symphony. This was really important because it gave me a lot more perspective on other people who were doing music, not just people in my band, people in the band in my high school, but people who were actually taking it very seriously. I was lucky enough to get a scholarship. All I had to do was set up the orchestra. And in fact, I got in that gig. I would mention this sometimes you have to improvise your way into a gig, right? So this was one where I auditioned and they said, well, we really need a timpanist. Can you play timpani? I'm like, yeah, of course I can play timpani. But I really hadn't taken many timpani lessons. I just kind of knew how to play it. So I went over there and I improvised a timpani solo for them, and I got the gig. So that worked out. And then one of the new skills I learned because of my scholarship was I had to set up the orchestras. And there were 3 orchestras. I had to get up all the chairs, set them in. I had to help the harpist in. I had to do things like that were actually I learned a lot doing that. In fact, I was once asked, I was helping set up a keyboard setup for the Berkeley Symphony. And after that and organizing all of that, they kind of asked me, we have this orchestra, not quite the orchestra manager, but the person who sets up the orchestra, we have that gig open. Do you want it? I didn't want it, but I said, I'd rather be playing, but thanks a lot. These skills, sometimes they become something later in life. So another thing that happened was I was able to go to this music camp. Another thing, I didn't have the means, but you wash dishes, you do whatever. I played with the 2 guys on the right were very well-known mallet players. I didn't know how well-known they were in the mallet world. You've probably never heard of them. Gordon Stout, Lee Stevens. But if you have, they were great. And I was pretty young then. I got some really interesting perspective about playing marimba. But I finally got my gig. My best gig was getting out of working at the bindery, I joined the circus. I mean, I had to audition one year as a junior in high school. I didn't get in. They hired a music teacher to do their summer show. The next year I auditioned again, and this time I got in. And the great thing about that was it really gave me the biggest opportunity to both expand my skill set, not just because I learned juggling and weird things like that, but because I learned how to present a little bit better. I was quite a reserved and shy kid. It was kind of like this, and to talk a little quiet. You had to get up on a box, and you had to I remember we went around probably for half an hour. We would go around in a circle. It would point to you. You had to get up on a box and say, "The Cream City Toy Circus Havering Review." You had to do this whole circus barker thing in an instant. And it opened you up, and you got a lot of interesting skills in the first month when you were putting together the show, working with other actors. Because I was the only musician in the show. Everyone else was an actor. So this was really great. In fact, when I started to come out to juggle, they had to have one of the actors play one of the keyboards. They just had him do like a... Well, not exactly that. But they had him do a little arpeggiation thing on the keyboard so they could just kind of keep going. But I learned a lot of fun things, and I worked with a lot of really interesting people. A lot of them were older than I was, and they were people who became theater directors or were already theater and circus directors, and that was great. The second year I was in it was the picture on the left, and the last year I was in it, we were doing Eco Circus, where I was playing. We had all this we had a very progressive sort of message. We were a little bit like Make a Circus mixed with a San Francisco mime troupe. We did sort of a radical theater component for about 20 minutes, and then we did circus and other stories for about 40. And one of the things we did was we were playing this junk percussion ensemble that I put together in the last year, the 7th year that I did. I did it for 7 summers. So it got me through college. It really paid for my career. And then I thought maybe I'd be an actor, but turns out I'm not really a great actor. Nonetheless, moving on. So I get to college. I'm experiencing these things like you are, electronic music classes. Actually, there are 25 percussion majors where I went to school. So 25 percussion majors, the only way to stick out was to do something unique. One of the things I did was I took up a lot of hand drums, but the most unique thing I did was really pursue electronics. And at that time, there weren't that many of us doing that. One of my favorites was the Electrocomp, but we had ARPs, we had all sorts of, and we were doing tape splicing. It was a lot of fun. We had a PDP-11 that was controlling a Buchla 200. That's a picture of a PDP-11. And I was doing dance classes. So I was accompanying dance classes. So I was keeping up kind of everything. And I was trying to do some playing at an interesting ensemble called the Neoteric Ensemble, pictured in the middle, where we do some activist, interesting things. That were we were a collaboration of dancers, musicians, and theater people. And then I also was doing a duo with this woman, Barbara Stagg, who was, we were going to schools and we were teaching about world music and about new music, specifically new music, but we would sometimes connect them all. So I was doing I thought, this is it. I'm doing my career. In fact, you might say I met Don Buchla in this environment, and that is, I met the 200 series, as I mentioned. So the 200 series is similar to what's over here. I'm going to, let me do a quick conversation with Don and see if that makes sense. So in some ways, I think of myself as meeting Don by just interacting with his instruments. So, if you guys know what envelope followers are, you have an idea. Okay, so like if this was, see if this. So it's taking my input and so I'm going to use that over here and see if I can talk to this machine. This is based on a piece that Don wrote with his wife, Amy, called Silicon Cello, but I have a different take on it. Don was a pretty interesting guy, and he had a great sense of, he was an unusual musician. But late at night when I lived at his house for a period. Well, I'll get to that later. And he would kind of howl and make sounds, and it was actually a great time. So I'm going to try to talk to Don now and see how he responds. So
Don was actually could be a difficult person to work with. We had our arguments, but actually he was very sweet in the end. It was hard to get through that. But nonetheless, I get out of school and I don't have any of that equipment that I have at school. I had no computer, I had no synth, I had no equipment except a steel drum and some other things. So I get out of school and I've got nothing except for a steel drum, a small marimba, and I'm picking up every gig I can get, right? So I'm I take clown gigs. My agent is the agent for the theater company, the circus, and of course, they're trying to hire things like mimes and whatnot. I'm doing balloon animals. I'm playing for weddings. I had to dress up a scarecrow to hand out pumpkins at a corporate event. I was taking everything I could get. But the one thing I did get that year after I was out was a teaching gig, and I taught K through 8 general music. And I actually learned a lot. I learned that was something I could do, and it actually helped me bond a lot with my mother, who had been a teacher of middle school kids since as long as I could remember. And I was living at the house. So I had some good times with that. I actually, if you look at this, 7th and 8th graders, all through, the only people I couldn't get to sing were the 8th graders. So I had them put a play on all about exploiting the 1st through 7th graders to make commercial music, thinking that they were just making recordings for fun. So that was my play. Anyway, meanwhile, Don is making things like the Touche, which is another keyboard, working with David Rosenboom on that at Mills. He makes the 400 and the 700. Notice no longer a keyboard again. And then he gets to a point where he realizes that there aren't a lot of interesting, there's a lot of digital music out there. The DX7 has come out. A lot of the analog stuff has gone away for more convenient digital means of playing. But the thing is, the controller, the expressive part of it hasn't evolved at all. Everyone's still using keyboards. They're not typically using one of these. But Don creates another capacitive sensed keyboard, and that is the Thunder. And it's in the arrangement of, it's kind of ergonomic. Your hands fit in, you'll see. And this is something that he was working on and had finished by the time I went. And instead of going and taking the teaching gig for another year, which is something I was offered, I decided I'm going to head out to somewhere else if they want me. And Mills seemed to want me because I don't know if I mentioned earlier, but when I was at my undergraduate work, I was taking all these extra courses, not in just electronics, but I learned this language called HMSL, which turned out to be very valuable in the end because it got me an assistantship at Mills. And nonetheless, here we are I'm going to do a piece. Like I said, I worked with Don for a long time, and he was sometimes difficult to talk to on the phone, so I would prepare myself. But the way I would do that was I wouldn't answer his phone calls, but I would let him leave a message because I knew every message was just going to be the same message, and I wouldn't know whether he was going to sell the company, whether he lost a schematic and I needed to find it, or I have no idea how significant his question was going to be. So this is some of the recordings I play on the Thunder, and it also uses the XY location of the surface. these are
Hey Joe, it's Don. Give me a call sometime. Talk to you soon.
these are samples of an opera singer. I made all the vowels and I crossfade between them.
Hey Joe, could you give me a call, please? This is Don. Hey Joe, it's Don. Give me a call when you can. Hey, it's Don. I found the name of the place. And that's McDonald's. Because what I thought, but the Madonna Inn, I found those to be still. And you'll sit on the fifth. So, have a good trip, and if there's anything I can do, so give me a call. Good luck. See you later. Bye. Hey Joe, could you give me a call? Give me a call sometime. Don, talk to you soon. Bye. Bye. Hey Joe, it's Don. Your mailbox is full on your cell. Give me a call. Super. Your life. See ya.
So, Don, like I said, he could be really sweet and he could be interesting. His tone was always the same. And it's interesting that he ended that last one with the same response he had about giving him a call sometime. But there was one message he left that was extremely long about how to get to this particular hotel that he thought of, and I thought I'd use that. Nonetheless, so Don's made the Thunder. And I worked with, by the way, the opera singer was John Dykers. It's somebody I've worked with on a number of projects. But one project where I had to create this choral, this large chorus. I'll go over it later if I have time, of his voice. And by creating all the crossfading with the vowels, it sounded so much more natural. I use that patch all the time. So after that, Don makes Lightning 1. Now, Lightning 1 is an interesting device. I'll maybe play you a bit of how that works. But it has optical sensors. Again, another expressive device that kind of fits my particular way of playing anyway, because I'm a very movement-oriented person. When I was with the theater company, we did study a little bit of mime. And a lot of that is sort of about keeping your hands in one place, being able to move. And this is about playing virtual instruments. So when you're playing these virtual instruments with, you're drumming or you're holding a button and you're moving around, it's kind of interesting, but a lot of people don't get the sense of it right away. So he created this exhibit for the Exploratorium, and I was hired. So the next thing that happens to me is I've graduated from Mills, but I also, again, I don't have a gig. Well, the first thing I get, luckily, because again, I knew HMSL, was this gig, takeover from Phil Burke, doing this exhibit. And that was my initial hire with Don. So again, sometimes you gain a skill that just takes you a little bit. It's one small little thing. Okay, so the way this one worked is this. You had this thing, you selected what your sound was going to be. And so this was using HMSL to control. It's like a video game. So now the little sprites there that moved around, those are the lightning positions. Then you could do things like select these art pictures, and where the wand, what pixel it went over, control. And then there was a version of in C that was it was just basically a drag and drop. I mean, what was cool about it is you had two hands to drag and drop with. So it was like having two mice. I'm actually still surprised there aren't two mice things very often in the world. There's still just the one. So this is a piece by Terry Riley. Terry gave us the permission to put this into this exhibit. This is cool. And then another one that I created for the exhibit was one I called Sound Smear. And it was just taking graphics that were on the screen and smearing them around to kind of paint, and then attaching them with a sound. You erase it and you start over. You grab a sound. You get the idea. So, what is lightning exactly? I actually have a video on what is lightning, and since we don't have a lot of time, I'll just play this briefly. But this I actually have on YouTube.
Hi, I'm Joel Davel, and I'd like to explain to you what a Buchla lightning is.
I had shorter hair.
The Buchla lightning is a MIDI controller. That means it is a device for musical input. The protocol is MIDI. Simply a way to talk between different synthesizers and software and hardware. And this device is a very unique sort of input device to control musical hardware. The reason is it doesn't use a keyboard, it uses infrared light. Now a lot of people think, okay, it's wireless, so is that like a theremin? Well, it's not, because a theremin doesn't use infrared light, and theremin uses body capacitance and your proximity to an antenna. This, however, tracks the X and Y location of two independent wands. It does this because each wand is putting out a unique infrared frequency. So not unlike maybe your television remote, which might use infrared to talk to the optics at the TV, this is also being optically read by a remote box, and it is got LEDs in the front of it, similar to what you would have on your television remote. Now there are a few more because we want to get different locations as it moves around. You don't have to point at it all the time. But other than that, it's basically an infrared emitting wand. Now, in addition to being a wand that is being tracked in the X and Y location, you have other inputs. You have this button. I'll show you. On wands that we use, you have this other button here, this red button here, which will turn on the wand, and will also turn it off, but it will also initiate a sound. Now here, this is like a theremin, but a theremin, you have one hand to do volume, and the other hand to do pitch and volume. So this will do pitch, whoops, and the X location if I want, and Y in the Y. Not Y, but volume in the Y. Y is a good question.
Why is a good question? It's because you can do things like this. This is sort of an excerpt. Whoops. This is briefly an excerpt of a piece I've done. It's a 1-minute excerpt of a 10-minute piece. So I'm going to jump around. Just kind of see how lightning works.
2, 3.
Did you mean to do that?
So that was an excerpt of Out of Thin Air. So that was one thing that I was interested in working with Don. So he had these controllers. I really wanted to work with Don. And the thing was, that software thing I did for him, that was a one-time thing. And long story short, actually, I ended up not getting paid for that. But I kind of got paid for it in a Lightning. I owned a Lightning after that. So it was cool. It was all worked out in the end, because the permanent hire really with Don was I started to do his hardware development. That is, he needed somebody to do both the solder up prototypes and to the first project we were actually was a commission to work on the OBMX. So I was doing stuffing guides, and then other things we were working on were Wind, a project that unfortunately never came to full fruition, and Thunder 2, which we marketed around, and which is something I was really interested in because as a hand drummer, electronic musician, I was really into that. It optically sensed the bottom of the head. We had a reflective head, and it worked pretty well. I almost think about picking that kind of thing up again, but nonetheless. So what happened with me was now I'm doing schematic development. I'm taking Don's handwritten schematics, and I'm putting them into the computer. And I hadn't been trained on this before this. I knew how to read schematics because I had taken electronics courses in undergrad, but and I had done some soldering then too. I made some little funny kit things when I was young, little amplifiers. But this was new. I was now working on actually taking Don's designs and turning them into schematics. And I was talking to the programmer too, because I could move inputs around on chips based on what the programmer and I talked about. So I started to learn a lot. But it's a very tedious thing because you not only have to stare at all these data sheets, but you also have to look at things like crossbars on CPUs to figure out what inputs and outputs can be used. You have the footprints of various devices that, what do you choose when you're doing the layout? What kind of space do you have? What are all the parameters? Are you using the right part? If a certain suffix on the end of a part is an E versus an F, that might mean it's incompatible. There are all these little tiny details that actually aren't that much fun, to be honest. And then there's creating the bill of materials, and then finally you actually end up with a product. So this is something that I've done a lot of. In fact, every device on stage, other than the computer, is something I've done circuit board layout on, even including this Keith McMillan bop pad that failed me earlier. I'm sure I didn't have its input up or something. But nonetheless, I've done a little bit on that because they had to update for USB-C, and everything else I've done the circuit board layout for Don. So that has been my entry into that part of my career, that part that's the instrument builder. The one instrument that, so after all this is done, you end up with something like, something you can play. And the team here is Mark Goldstein, who is doing the software, Don, who did the electronic design, and I did the circuit board layout. And we're toasting the very first time that instrument made sound. It's a great day because now here's the funny thing. Mark and I did this project up until this point for free. We weren't getting paid to do it because our project, what we were getting, not unlike what happened with the Exploratorium, I was getting an instrument out of it. But not only just an instrument he was already building, but something completely unique built to our specifications, to the things that Mark and I wanted in an instrument. And so we put in all this extra time. Luckily for us, we did get paid a little extra because this was some of the boards that were designed then. I learned a lot about circuit board design in this process. We ended up with this instrument we called the last great controller of the 20th century. There's Don and I in a little promotion. And what happened was another company actually picked up the Marimba Lumina and bought it, and it became theirs. We only sold a few of that gold one. There's a few. Tool has one. There's only 6 of those gold ones. But this one, we sold 50. That's not a lot. So, and I'm still building them, but I'm the only one. Long story there. Maybe I'll get to it. But the point is, we end up with this interesting controller, which I haven't really mentioned before, how it works. But the interesting thing about it is it uses, remember that voice I was talking about earlier? doesn't use striking the instrument at all. In fact, it uses radio frequencies. Inside each one of these pill bottles is a little coil with a capacitor. And if you know anything about tuned, you're tuning a little resonant circuit. And that's what's in every one of these mallets. You actually don't have to touch it. So this piece I do about medication. I've done a lot of work with people who have Parkinson's, at least composed for my wife's dance company who works with people with Parkinson's. And one of them was a piece about medication. And so there's a lot of text in this piece. And I played it live using the pill bottles. And every one of these can be different, slightly different. You'll hear the red one. Hear that sound that goes with it? It's a little bit different than... Sure, I get the point. Some of them have So, without getting too much into the Marimba Lumina, know that each one of these mallets can actually have a different sound to it. Actually, I did have a patch up that did that. This one. When I was at this point in the piece earlier, it has that sound, but the red mallet has that additional string. You can ignore the digital noise. So each mallet can have a different purpose, and it can also do things like, even subtle things like changing it knows the location on the bar. So not only could I change maybe the voice, the vowels like I did in the earlier piece, but I can just totally change the vibrato. So it gives me an additional expressivity when I'm playing with the mallet instrument. So that gets me a lot of my gigs. In fact, probably the majority of my gigs that really, the ones that tour, the ones that are unique enough where they want me specifically, are ones that, we're at Zankel Hall here on the upper left with Van Ang Vo, who's a very accomplished Vietnamese musician. She's playing traditional instruments, and there's a taiko player, and there's me. So it's kind of a unique ensemble. I'm playing with Richard Howell down below, and I'm playing with Jack West up on the gold one, kind of a jazz group, where I'm playing a lot of the bass lines with my left mallet, the red mallet. And I'm playing there with Paul Drescher in front of the Diego Rivera mural at the DIA in Detroit. And we're playing one of his invented instruments, but you see the Marimba Lumina there too. Because with the kind of things I can do on this instrument, I can approach other unique invented instruments and kind of do something organic with them as well. Even use some of their samples, but also just, the ability to sort of do weird pitch bends or unusual things kind of blends well with certain unusual instruments. So that works out really well. We jump back to what Don's doing. I'm going to jump through this real quick. Piano bar, which he made for Nanik. And, well, he made for anybody, but, he likes to make things for his friends. And the piano bar was an optically sensing the keyboard, actual piano. Did the circuit board layout on that. It became a Moog device. But then also, getting back to my career, I'm still mixing up some things. There was a period Don wasn't feeling well. We weren't making much product. I started working with Keith McMillan and Keith McMillan Instruments. We were working on a violin bow. This was actually my very first really tiny layout. A lot of the stuff, the Marimba Lumina is huge. Circuit boards are gigantic. In fact, this is the circuit board for Marimba Lumina, right? The middle one. It's also a musical instrument in my view. But it's a different kind of musical instrument now. But this is one that failed us, so I have some notes on where it failed. I don't think it'll ever come back to life, so I can just kind of throw it over there. But if you want to take a look at it later, you can. In fact, I have if you want little circuit boards, I have some like dead circuit boards up here if you really want to take a look at some of the layouts, including something for the cabo, which was that device there, something for the neck, and some old modular stuff that it doesn't work. So you can take it home if you want. They're extra. They're here. Look at this. Obsolete circuit boards. So, as you see here, I'm also doing a demo for the bop pad, which is this. And if you go online and you look for the title of this video, which I think is Introducing Bop Pad, you will see me playing first as a musician, just as an average musician, not any oh, this is great, I'm a drummer. But I actually did some circuit board layout on it later. As I mentioned earlier, they had to move to USB-C, and luckily they used the layout program. The previous guy used the layout program I used, so I helped him update that. So I've been involved with them. They've always been friends, so that's cool. And then there's the 200E system, which is this, which I did all the circuit board layout on. And we're getting towards the end. So this device, my interface is doing wonderful things. My interface is adding a little bit of digital influence on its own, but we'll let that go. So in this device, the middle device was the last thing that I worked on with Don. It actually was, long story, how I ended up having to redo the entire right half of it. That has to do with how the company was sold, but nonetheless, this is something that it's a lot of fun to play. If I could play. I had this whole plan of creating this great piece for you, but we have to run through these. Nonetheless, so this is the 200E. And there's it's basically it's basically the modular thing. Let's go back to this. Unlike, say, a Eurorack and instantly jump back to your preset. The reason you can do that is because what's nice about the 200E is it saves the knob settings that you make. And so it saves the knob settings and the switch settings, so you can set whatever you want. The thing is, you still have to use all these patch cords. But other than that, it's actually kind of fun. I can do a whole set of varied material because I have this device. So I guess I'm going to try to wrap it up. I mean, I still work a lot with dance. I do a lot of collaboration. I've done a lot of collaboration with Margaret Jenkins' dance company. A lot of that is through Paul Drescher. And also with my wife's dance company, Denaga. If you go to her site, denaga.org, there's a lot of my compositions that are underlying a lot of the videos you'll see in the work that she does. And also, in that meantime, working with Don for that 20 years, I was making albums with people on either acoustic percussion or electronic percussion. This band over here, I just did a show with 25th anniversary. We did an album 25 years ago, and we got back together just a few weeks ago and did a show. That's on YouTube, too. These bands over here are actually theater bands, the ones where I'm dressed kind of crazy. And then I also work with Guillermo Galindo and composers of the like, trying to create interesting new music projects. One nice thing about what I'm doing is I get to sort of pick and choose projects that I work on and ones that I think are kind of culturally meaningful. So I'm more willing to not do certain projects. But I really want to do things like this. This was a lot of fun. A lot of these are things that came from the border wall. And then finally, back to theater. I've done some theater gigs with Cal Shakes and with South Coast Rep that are a ton of fun. I actually got to go back to playing trumpet, which I did very young on one of these projects. And there's Peter and the Starcatcher, there's The Tempest, there's All's Well That Ends Well. They were a lot of fun. Got to meet Teller, who was one of the directors. And then now still working with ensembles like Paul Drescher Ensemble, who kind of puts together a lot of what I do. And that is, we had to read challenging music, so I used my skills there and I keep them up. But also, because we were often playing the music of other composers. But Paul values improvising a lot. And also knowing your technology really well, which I obviously do. And then working with theater and dance, which we do a lot of. So putting that all together kind of combines all the skills that I have. So to wrap it up, what to do is basically look for opportunities. That's my 4-point. My 4-point thing is take advantage of your environment. You're in Silicon Valley. There are mentors. There are Silicon Valley conferences you can actually go to. Some of them are just the trade shows you can go to for free. Otherwise, you might have to sign up for classes. But some of the trade shows actually offer like free classes. I do this with the circuit board conference. Every once in a while, I'll take a class, and it's highly valuable. And other times, I just go for the trade show and learn some things from the people that go. And 2 is acquiring skills. At every point, whether it's in school or if it's in your job, especially if you get a job that you can acquire skills at, even if it wasn't their intention, if they have an education program, even better. But a lot of bosses these days do not see the value in that, so you really have to push them. I was just reading an article about how CEOs don't get the point of extra, think it's a waste of time, but you're the individual working, you know that you need extra skills just in case that job goes away. Also, find out what you're good at and what brings you joy. I say a little bit of finding what you're good at too, because sometimes what brings you joy you're not actually great at, which is fine, and I encourage you to do that, but you may not get a job doing it. So find out what people who are offering you work studying, offering you jobs doing those things, or see if you're really good at this. Just take that in mind to consider those things. But it should be something that brings you some joy. And the 4th thing is kind of what I try to do a lot of, is do something completely unique that somebody is willing to pay you to do because no one else does it. And try to do it at a high level. I mean, I do all these crazy different things, and I'm really trying to do all of them at a high level. I want to be able to play in an orchestra. I want to play in a jazz group. I want to be able to do circuit board design and develop instruments, work in theater. All those things I want to do at a kind of high level where people really want to do sometimes I try not to tell people I work with for the first time that I do those other things, because I don't want them to judge me based on that one thing. Because if this gets out and people hear that I didn't know you work, you're an electronic musician, I don't need to hire you. I'd like to work in the orchestra, even if it's acoustic. That's okay. And likewise, they might say, oh, he's a classical musician. What does he need to do this for? I'd like to do all of these different things. And so I like to get to know people well enough first to show that I can do what they want at a high level so they hire me. That's kind of it. So that's all I have to say. Any questions?
Michael. Hi. My question is, what is the circular display on the 200E system?
That is the 252. And actually, I thought that is what it is there's a Euclidean rhythm generator. I mean, it can be polyphonic. Let's see, where did I put that picture? So this thing over here on the left, it's just like this. This is actually one of my favorite layouts because it was really hard. But this is a whole bunch of LEDs behind this. There's probably, and they're RGB LEDs, so they change color based on how you program them. And it ends up with this really nice stained glass effect. So Don came up with this honeycomb idea, and I did the layout. Now every LED is turned a certain angle because they're square, and I had to turn each of them to fit inside this little thing. And what I can do is then I can edit it, and if I had it, say, in Euclidean mode, I can change. You can see I can change what circle I'm working on. So this is a 16. Essentially, this is a 16-stage sequencer on the outside circle. This is a 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. Oh, that's 3, 4. I skipped one. Anyway. So you have all these concentric circles, and you can either have them work together as where they cycle on one, they come together as a polyrhythm, or they can kind of cycle on their own. So I can change that. So I can select different circles to be the main. So if I select a different circle as the clock, it changes the pattern a little bit. So that gives you an idea. Also, if you're playing on the cycle, like these are going independently. Now if I put it back on cycle under one, they become a polyrhythm. So that gives you some idea. That's what that is. So yeah, that's a fun one. And it looks great up there. But it's like 200 LEDs. Yeah. Anything else?
What would you say your favorite part of your job and journey is, and what would you say the most difficult part of it?
The most favorite part of my job is performing. I felt a little unprepared today. I like to really have a tight set, and but I knew that it was really more about hopefully giving you ideas of what my career is like, rather than hey, that was cool, you can do that. But I love to perform. That it's almost like the part I don't really need to get paid for, but that's maybe 15 minutes to an hour out of your day. Even if you're doing a big show, maybe that's 2 hours. Everything else, the schlep is not a lot of fun. And certainly my part of the job where I'm doing circuit board layout, the layout part is actually kind of fun. I love to do that part. But the bill of materials, acquiring parts, finding alternatives because the part isn't available, and it's probably my least favorite thing to do. It is definitely my least favorite thing to do. But stare at data sheets just because something. So there's a lot of tedious stuff that drives me a little bit nuts. But the circuit board layout, the performing, all of that, a lot of fun. Meeting people is a lot of fun. Actually, the most fun I've ever had is when I get to perform with other people in a community and they think that's cool, I can play with them. So it's not just playing solo, it's really playing with other people. That's the most joy I got out of anything. So.
Have you ever done music critique? And if you have, how did it work and how did it play out for you?
Concrete? Like music concrete?
Yeah.
Like tape music? Oh,
Yeah.
I love tape music. I have, for my first, when I was at Northern Illinois, we had tape decks, like Revoxes, and we had to splice tape. And one of my first projects was to take a speech of Ronald Reagan's and have him say something completely different. But then I had to put him on a school bus. So I had to EQ the school bus so it makes it sound like he's getting in the school bus, now he's in the school bus, now he's exiting the school bus and going. So I had to do these interesting projects. That was kind of a little concrete. But also I did this project where I had recorded my voice on 4-track tape and I just spun it with my fingers. And then I had it go through the electrocomp, which is one of my favorite things. And I had it changing that was a piece called Untitled Faces. Anyway, I love to work with tape. It's great to play with physically to splice and do all that, but also to manipulate the tape, play with gigantic tape loops, which is another thing I did in an undergrad. I had like a 30-second tape loop around a percussion setup. It was a very elaborate piece. So I love tape. And I love concrete and things like that are things I love to listen to. And basically, it's a lot like sampling, right?
Thank you. I think we're going to end the questions here, but if you'd like to come up and talk to Joel or take a look at these instruments, please do. And I just want to thank Joel for coming here and setting all this up and presenting today.
Thanks. I hope I didn't talk too fast. I was okay? Okay, cool.